Welcome, lovely friends, to an episode of Ghosts and Folk and another browse around some of London's many theatres. Come with me as we walk the streets of the Big Smoke, and let's see who's lurking in the shadows of these temples to the arts. Once again we are back in London and taking a stroll around some of the theatres that stand in this bustling multicultural metropolis. Of course, theatres are obvious places that would collect paranormal energy, really, aren't they? The buildings are old usually and full of hope and disappointment, drama both on and off stage, places where dreams are born and also crushed. The thrill of a new performance, the tension before the curtain rises for the players on the stage, the orchestra below the stage and the crew backstage too. And all of this human energy charging the atmosphere like an emotional battery. So maybe this is why theatres keep a hold of their ghosts. And also because of the deep love these buildings that many have. And also because of the deep love of these buildings that many actors and theatre professionals have over the years for these buildings. They are not mere stone and glass and metal. So come with me skipping through the busy streets of London, and let's head along to our first theatre. The Theatre Royal Haymarket. The Theatre Royal Haymarket is also known as the Haymarket Theatre and the Little Theatre, and it can be found on Haymarket in the city of Westminster. It dates back to 1720 and is the third oldest theatre in London. It was built by John Potter in 1720 on the site of the King's Head pub. It cost £1,500 sterling to build, furnished, purchase the costumes, the scenery of props, all for £1,500. This was a somewhat rough area of London. It was full of pickpockets and conmen and ladies of the night, street performers and those down on their luck and looking for the main chance or a little bit of bawdy fun. In 1741, the famous actor Charles Macleod, star of Drury Lane, trod the boards here and also opened what is thought to be the very first drama school. In 1747, Mr. Samuel Foote took on the lease, and in 1766 he acquired permission to stage what were known as legitimate dramas, in other words spoken word plays as opposed to those with a musical element or an opera. The original theatre building was a little further north than its current location, the current theatre being rebuilt in 1821 under the stewardship of Morris, designed by architect John Nash at royal instruction. The freehold of the building owned by the Crown Estate. In 1837, Benjamin Webster, actor and playwright, took over the theatre and the Haymarket became known as a place of innovation. The very first matinees were performed here, for example, and it also became known as a place to see some of the brightest names in acting and performance of the time. It was frequented by Queen Victoria herself, who became friends with Webster, and she was supplied with a royal box by the stage and a reception room where she could relax. A snippet of theatre lore. One of the actors during this time included the brother-in-law of John Wilkes Booth, John Sleeper Clark, who left the US after the assassination of President Lincoln by John Wilkes Booth. The Bancrofts, Squire and Marie, took over in 1879 and completely redecorated, much to the consternation of regulars, but they were placated by the addition of a new bar area. Peace reigned again thanks to a glass and a tipple. The next era of note was the early 1900s and through to the 1950s. This saw the staging of many productions that broke the mould and introduced dazzling actors of the day, including Vivien Leigh, John Gielgud, Noel Coward, Ralph Richardson, Peggy Ashcroft and many more from this golden age of theatre. From the 1960s to the 1990s, the Theatre Royal Haymarket became the place for star-filled productions and classics. Actors appearing during this time included Derek Jacobi as Alan Turing, Penelope Keith in Hobson's Choice, and Robert Lindsay as Cyrano de Bergerac. To this day, it is a theatre that one can see great actors performing. For me, my favourites would have been Maggie Smith and Judi Dench. So after this brief history of this noble old theatre, what of the ghosts? Well, there are two here I will speak of. One a famous gentleman, and one is a mysterious lady. The spectral gentleman is said to be John Baldwin Buckstone, who was the manager of the theatre during the mid-1800s, and also one of its actors. He was also noted as a friend of Charles Dickens, who admired Buckstone's acting talents very greatly, and it was said that this friendship meant that Dickens' mistress, Ellen Ternan, was never without a role in one of the productions. Buckstone did not pass away at the theatre he loved, and yet his ghost started to be sighted within even a year of his passing. It has been noted that he appears drawn to comedy performances, which was his own acting speciality, and he appears around and about the theatre. It is a widely known fact that during the performance of Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen in Waiting for Godot, Patrick Stewart came off stage during an interval looking stunned, according to theatre director Nigel Everett, and Ian McKellen asked him what had happened, what threw him. Sir Patrick replied he had just seen a ghost on stage during Act 1. Everett, when interviewed later, would also tell that the ghost had not been sighted so often, maybe 3 or 4 times in the last years, and although the spectral fellow seemed more drawn to comedies, he also appeared during successful runs. The writer Nick Bromley, collector of theatre ghost stories, and he himself, with an impressive career of backstage of theatre, spoke of this haunting in his book Stage Ghosts and Haunted Theatres. In it, Sir Patrick relayed his experience, and Mr. Bromley proposes that this sighting may not be Buckstone, as the clothes do not fit other sightings and just seem too modern, which begs the question, who is this fellow who they all thought had been someone from the audience who had climbed on stage and then vanished? I must just add here that Nick Bromley's book is just brilliant, and I can thoroughly recommend it for the bookshelves for anyone who loves theatre ghosts or any ghost stories, and from someone who's worked behind the scenes, and there will be a link to where you can buy it from in the description of this episode. In 1949, Sir Donald Sinden was appearing in The Heiress with Sir Ralph Richardson. Sinden and co-star actress Gillian Howell were walking down the stairs from their respective dressing rooms on their way to the stage when they passed by a man, completely solid-looking, dressed in an old-fashioned dark suit and staring out of the window, looking from the back of the theatre building down to Suffolk Street. Their fellow performer Ralph Richardson had his dressing room on this side of the backstage area, and they simply presumed it was him. They wished him a good evening, yet they received no reply and so carried on walking downstairs. It was then that they suddenly realised it couldn't be Ralph Richardson because he was on stage at the time. They rushed back to the spot that they had seen this stranger, and there was nobody there, no sign of anyone around. The actress Fiona Fullerton also had an experience with Buckstone's ghost. At the time, she was appearing in a presentation of one of the plays of Oscar Wilde. Buckstone's own dressing room in life had been number 1. Currently, and for some time now, this is the manager's office. And yet a man could often be heard practising lines from inside, and on opening the door, there would be nobody there, only a completely empty office. Other actors who have sighted or heard Buckstone while performing in the theatre include Margaret Rutherford, Dame Flora Robson, Michael Flanders and Dame Judi Dench, who was attending Michael Dennison's memorial service at the Haymarket and saw the ghost as a solid figure in a black frock coat. By the time she had reached the place where he was stood, the stranger had vanished. One actor who heard whispering noises coming from a dressing room opened the door, curious as to who was inside, and found himself staring at a strange man sat in one of the chairs, wearing a long frock coat. Confused and stunned, he shut the door quickly, locked it, shut it, and called over the firemen of the theatre. On opening the door once more, the room was completely empty. 2 other firemen working at the theatre had seen a man staring at them through one of the windows. Could it be the same one that Donald Sinden and Gillian Howell had seen the strange man looking through, but from the other side? In the 1970s, Googie Withers and John McCollum's teenage daughter had come to visit them during their run of The Circle. As the stars of the show had many people to talk to and entertain post-show, their daughter decided to go for a walk around the theatre. She decided to explore the stage, which was now faintly lit, but the audience area in darkness, with just enough ambient light that she could see the chairs. She noticed in the box to the right of the stage, the royal box, there was someone sat there, a middle-aged man gazing blankly at the stage area. He had curly hair and was beautifully dressed, possibly wearing a waistcoat. He seemed completely oblivious to her presence. She returned to her parents and friends, and as they left, she warned the staff not to be too quick to lock up, as there was a man still in the theatre. At this, they were all shocked, because they knew that there was nobody else in there. Olga Barnett, assistant stage manager on one show, saw Buckstone standing behind Michael Flanders, of performing duo Flanders and Swan fame. Standing behind his wheelchair quietly was a figure. Her initial thought was that it was a stagehand and they should bring the curtain down. But as she pondered about what to do, the man disappeared before her eyes. She asked who it was once the show was over and was told many audience members had not only seen the same figure who should not have been there, but also mentioned that this person had been wearing an old-looking frock coat. The actor Martin Shaw also had a strange experience here. He was performing in A Man for All Seasons, and his partner and her friend had come to watch. They were all talking quietly when both women, both of whom are considered psychic, stopped and stared at the same place and asked if they had all seen him. The him in question was described as looking flamboyant. This person did a little dance and placed a scarf around Martin Shaw's neck. Martin Shaw had no idea at the time that the theatre was even considered haunted. And so now to the mysterious lady of the Haymarket. Hanging on one of the walls leading upstairs to the dressing rooms is a photograph. It is a portrait of a lady, and her name is Muriel Akerd. Muriel was a mill owner's daughter from Bingley, a talented character actress with over 40 films under her belt, but only one credit for appearing in the theatre. So why is her portrait so prominently displayed on the staircase? Well, nobody actually knows or remembers. However, she may still have some connection to the Haymarket. In 1996, the show on stage was The Master Builder, and this event happened on closing night. Company manager Frankie Zambra had made arrangements to meet friends and colleagues. Finding none of them at the allotted meeting place, she wandered onto the now empty stage. And from here she noticed a figure in the auditorium. A woman, quite butch-looking as she described, but wearing a long flowing gown. As she focused on this strange figure, the woman dissolved to absolute nothingness. Now her friends had arrived and they searched everywhere together for this mysterious lady, but of course nobody was in the building. Could this be Muriel Akerd? From her photo, she does look a strong northern woman, and there can't be found any reason why her portrait is there, but it must be something important. However, to this very day it is accepted practice to not remove the portrait, and when going up or down the stairs to acknowledge Muriel, just for that extra bit of luck. The Picadilly. Found at the junction of Denman Street and Sherwood Street and quite near to Piccadilly Circus is the Piccadilly Theatre. It opened its doors in 1928, an era of flappers and jazz, comedy and tragedy. Even during World War II, shows were still performed at this great theatre, including Noel Coward's Blithe Spirit, and John Gielgud performed in Macbeth. And so to its history now. Impresario Edward Lorillard bought a site behind Piccadilly Circus. It was a rundown stable yard and his goal was to build a theatre. This was a simple Art Deco building designed by Bertie Carew and Edward A. Stone, and sumptuous interiors of the period were by Marc-Henri Lévy and Gaston Laverdey. The premiere performance was a musical, Blue Eyes, with music by Jerome Kern and a script by Guy Bolton and Graham John. And the new theatre became a success, even making history when it hosted one of the world's first ever talkie films. For some years after that, it was owned by Warner Brothers and was a cinema for these talkies. In 1936-37, it had been redecorated as a cabaret theatre and was renamed the London Casino. New bars were added and stalls, and a new entertainment concept called Choose Your Time. This was a mixture of newsreels, live orchestras, solo performances, cartoons, and a one-act comedy called Talk of the Devil with a young John Mills featured in the cast. Following from this, it became a place to watch West End hit shows that had moved here from their initial theatre run, and at a cheaper price for a wider audience. The 1940s saw it become a kind of home for the musicals of Cole Porter, Oscar and Hammerstein and Noel Coward. Being sited in central London meant it became a victim of air raids during the war, and it was indeed hit, closing the theatre for several months. In the 1950s, though, it was restored to its former glory and its former name after all the damage from the bombings. The Piccadilly was back. The 1960s saw many great plays performed here. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, A Streetcar Named Desire, and it also became a recording studio for the Beatles. In the 1980s, it became a popular variety theatre for shows broadcast live on TV, and during the 90s it was home to Matthew Bourne's Swan Lake. From the 2000s to today, it is home to musicals, and some of the most popular currently performing have had their home at the Piccadilly. The ghost of the Piccadilly is the former actress Evelyn Leigh, Boo to all who knew her, the theatre's first leading lady on its opening. In the theatre office hangs her photograph. When this was removed from the wall years and years ago, all hell broke loose. Poltergeist-like activity was activated around the theatre. Doors would open and close on their own and slam shut. Objects would throw themselves around the rooms. Evelyn was not happy. Once her portrait was put back in place, everything became calm once more. Evelyn Leigh was a dynamo of early film, radio and an established theatre actress, working even into her 90s. She had been a child actress. Her whole life was acting. In the 1920s, she was London West End's highest paid star, so no wonder the opening at the Piccadilly had such an excitement around it. By the 1930s, Evelyn Leigh was well known in the States also, a stalwart of musical romances and period dramas in both film and stage. With such a long life dedicated to acting, it's no wonder Evelyn has such a strong presence at the theatre. If you take a guided tour of the Piccadilly, you might be able to spot this portrait backstage too. So please show Evelyn some respect by just acknowledging her long legacy of the arts that this grand dame brought to both film and theatre. The new Wimbledon. Heading a little out of the city now, we can travel to the area known internationally for its tennis tournament, Wimbledon, and we find the new Wimbledon Theatre. This theatre was built by the entrepreneur and lover of all things theatrical J.B. Mulholland, who also owned the King's Theatre in Hammersmith. The new Wimbledon was built on the site of an old house with large gardens, and part of its design, by Cecil Massey and Roy Young, included a lavish Turkish bath, strictly for the men, of course, of the cast and crew and staff, and this was in the underground area of the building. This new theatre opened to the public on the 26th of December 1910 with a classic theatrical event of British Christmas entertainment, a pantomime, and this one was Jack and Jill. It seems this theatre became a great favourite with musicians, songwriters and singers, taking to the stage here and bringing popular entertainment between the wars were the great Gracie Fields, Ivor Novello, Sybil Thorndike and Noel Coward. In 1960 it was this theatre that held the world premiere of Lionel Bart's Oliver, which then went on to the West End of course and became a classic. Another premiere held here before transferring to London's Theatreland was Half a Sixpence featuring Tommy Steele. In the 1990s the new Wimbledon was the subject of many refurbishments and decorations, although many of the much loved extravagant decorative pieces were kept, even including the gold-coloured statue of Letitia, goddess of gaiety, who is also known as the theatre's angel. It is thought that when the theatre was first opened, pieces from one stage set collapsed, tragically killing an actress whose name sadly is lost to time. Both performers and members of the audience often feel a very strong female energy though around this area. One visitor, a woman on a guided tour of the building, was hit with a sense of this female energy so strongly that it actually knocked her off balance. And sometime before this, one of the ushers who was on cleaning duty near the ladies' toilets heard the distinct sound of a woman whistling coming from one of the rooms. Of course, nobody was in the theatre at this time, except for the usher. Another usher had a frightening experience when climbing the many flights of stairs to the upper circle and using the banister to pull themselves up. Another hand could be felt encasing their own, not in a rough way but terrifyingly soft and gentle, a strange disembodied hand. The paranormal investigator and stage door supervisor Mark English, who also holds ghost walks around the theatre, recounted some strange and interesting tales during an interview. He told of one lady who had attended a performance the evening before with her sister, who used a wheelchair. As the lights were dimming, the lady's sister noticed a dark figure at the end of the row, who seemed to be staring at her. In description, he was large. He had a goatee-style beard and was dressed like a Puritan. The woman was absolutely terrified, even though with her sister and surrounded by audience members. After some time, the figure simply dissolved. He also recounted that many people have seen a strange dark shape, maybe a shadow person, making their way along the back of the auditorium near the bar in that area. It is believed that this shade is a former staff member, sometimes seen clearer, a short man in a flat cap. Although sceptical by nature, Mr. English has had his own strange occurrence while working in the crew room on an empty Sunday. There were hard helmets placed high on a shelf in the room, and as he watched, one of these hard hats lifted into the air, moved to one side and fell on the floor. Of course, it comes as no surprise that Mr. J.B. Mulholland would be one of the ghostly figures here. He loved the theatre, and it seems he visits here often. He has been sighted many times, dressed in beautiful Edwardian fashion, and sat in what was his particular seat in the second row, B27, and also in the dress circle area watching rehearsal silently. In the 2000s, the then front of house manager was talking to a colleague in the locked up theatre when he saw a man stood by seat B27. He asked his colleague who that was, to which the reply came that he couldn't see anyone. The manager was just about to shout to the stranger to ask if he needed some help, when the figure began to walk away and dissolved into nothing. It was only later the manager realised that this figure was the same as the portrait that hangs in the dress circle bar. A grey lady haunts the new Wimbledon too, wandering between stalls and stage, and has also been seen in one of the theatre bedrooms in the building. During the refurbishments in the 1990s, there were some very strange happenings. And we, as true ghost story lovers, know that this disruption to the fabric of older buildings can often bring forth spirits and enhance paranormal activity. During this period of rebuilding work and redecorating, fire alarms and sprinklers would turn on constantly with no cause, to the point that the stage area was flooded. Weirdly, however, the fire curtain that protects the stage from the audience remained completely bone dry. Also during this time, a photograph was taken of the front entrance of the theatre, and on developing the film, a grey ghostly figure could be seen at the window of one of the storerooms. But of course, everyone knew there was no one in this room at the time. The Garrick. Heading back to the West End now, the theatreland of London, we find Charing Cross Road in the city of Westminster and a fine building known as the Garrick, named for the famous actor David Garrick. This was a popular entertainment theatre that in its early days was known for melodramas and later into today the comedies. The Garrick was backed by the Sullivan half of the great comic opera duo Gilbert and Sullivan. And it was a difficult building to construct as during excavations an underground river was discovered. However, eventually all was overcome and the new Garrick was built. The first manager was a great friend of Sullivan's, the actor John Hare, who performed in the very first play, The Profligate. And all things ticked along pretty well, until it didn't. For some reason, the audiences fell off and the theatre declined in popularity, and it was leased then to theatre impresario Arthur Bouchier. Over the many years, there have been some classics performed at the Garrick, including Peter Pan, Water Babies, Harlequin and The Fairy's Dilemma. In 1968, plans were afoot to redevelop the whole of the Covent Garden Theatreland area, and everything was under threat. Alongside the Garrick, the Vaudeville, Adelphi, Lyceum and Duchess theatres were planned for demolition. The Actors' Union Equity, the Musicians' Union and various theatre owners grouped together to protest. Thankfully, they succeeded, and the theatres were saved, and in the late 1980s and then late 1990s, the Garrick was restored to its former glory. In the year 2000, the Garrick was bought by Andrew Lloyd Webber under the Really Useful Group of Theatres, and after that it was bought again by another theatre group, Nymax, joining the Lyric, the Apollo, the Vaudeville and the Duchess. So who haunts this beautiful old building? Well, Arthur Bouchier, of course, an actor never known to underplay a role, who took the reins of the Garrick in the Edwardian era alongside his then wife, the esteemed actress Violet Vanber. He is said to visit the theatre still. He was a very accomplished man, actor and manager, also involved heavily in British politics under the Labour Party, and he was renowned for hating theatre critics. People have reported sighting Arthur Bouchier backstage and at the back of the theatre, most often appearing towards the end of performances, and has also been known to tap unwitting visitors on the back. The Garrick is also reputed to have a phantom staircase leading from the room that once was his office to the roof, that also has the ghost of Bouchier peering on the steps. One former staff member of the Garrick told how many times he would be tapped on the shoulders by an invisible presence, and actually witnessed a bottle in one of the bars lift from the shelf, moved to the side and crashed to the floor. He also had a sighting of a well-dressed man in a top hat who vanished as he watched. He had been coming out of what was the once office of Arthur Bouchier and presumed it must have been the old fellow's ghost having a wander around. The theatre also is known for having many strange cold spots that have been spoken of by many members of casts and crews and staff, unnerving and unnatural cold areas. In 1980, during the performances of the play Death Trap, the cast members who were on stage could each hear their lines being spoken to them in a whisper, just a slight fraction before they were due to give the lines themselves. And this happened on more than one night, much to the consternation of the cast, who were becoming nervous, thinking it was an audience member playing a trick, or maybe even one of their own crew. And so the theatre had a specialist listener brought in to listen with ear trumpets. These experts pinned down the area of the voice down to one side of the stage where absolutely nobody was stood. Over time of the play's performance, the voice eventually faded away and stopped. It is thought that this could have been the ghost of Bouchier trying to help, or maybe another actor-manager, comedy actor and film star Jack Buchanan. Whoever this disembodied voice may have been, though, was obviously trying to help. The London Palladium. This grand dam of London theatres is in the West End, found on Argyle Street in Soho, a theatre with a massive history of famous stars who have graced her stage, thanks to the long run of shows that were also televised on Sunday nights at the London Palladium. It is one of these shows that highlighted the growing popularity of the young Beatles and led to the invention of the term Beatlemania by one of the newspapers. This theatre not only hosts its own shows, but is also sometimes home of the Royal Variety performances, TV specials and musical concerts. The theatre was originally known as just the Palladium and is known as a Christmas pantomime theatre. In fact, my husband Mark, when he was a child in London, attended 2 pantomimes at the Palladium. He remembered it as being very lavish and imposing to such young eyes, with steps seemingly impossibly steep for such little legs. In the 1920s, the Palladium also ran as a cinema, but even adding this aspect of entertainment could not prevent its close in 1928. The theatre closed its doors, but only for a little while. Close to bankruptcy, the theatre was bought by impresario George Black, and his mission was to revive this old beauty. He brought in variety shows with a capital V. He brought the most popular UK entertainers of the day, and also invited some of the biggest names from the US to come and perform, which they did, of course. And these included Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong and Ethel Waters, among so many more. During the Second World War, the theatre was hit by a parachute bomb that did not explode, thankfully, and the brave bomb disposal team of the day were able to defuse it and remove it safely despite the ticking that had started to sound. After the death of George Black, the theatre was bought by Val Parnell, one of the founders of ITV, the UK's second created television channel. His plan carried on from Black's, and during his ownership he brought over Carmen Miranda, Danny Kaye, Bing Crosby, Ella Fitzgerald, Sammy Davis Jr., Frank Sinatra, Judy Garland and Bob Hope. Sadly, British stars were rather neglected during this era, the focus on bringing Hollywood glamour to the theatre and the TV screens of British homes that had them. And of course the British royal family have been regular attendees with the Royal Variety shows for many years. Since 2000 it has been a part of Andrew Lloyd Webber's Really Useful group of theatres, and so is safe. There was reputed to once be a staircase that led from the Royal Circle in the theatre to Argyle House. A spectral lady appears, beautiful, dressed in a crinoline dress, that has been sighted walking up and down these stairs, and it is thought that she was the mistress of the Duke of Argyle of the 1700s. One of the most well-known of the Palladium faces, and if you are British and of a certain age, is the former actor, dancer and presenter Bruce Forsyth. He was a dynamo of British entertainment and presenter of Sunday night at the London Palladium, constantly on TV in many different roles. He loved this theatre, so much that he considered it a second home. On August the 18th, 2018, exactly a year after he had passed away, his ashes were interred beneath the stage in a private ceremony. Truly, he has never left, not his earthly remains, nor his spirit either. Cast, crew and staff all report his presence, friendly and encouraging, around the theatre. And everyone who reports these energies is 100% certain that this is Bruce's helpful ghost. The other thing they attribute to his mischievous character is scripts and personal items disappearing and turning up in strange places, lights going dim when trying to read certain lines during rehearsal. The respect for Bruce Forsyth is still strong at this theatre that was so very, very close to his heart. The London Colliseum. Finally, our stroll around London theatres leads us to the Colliseum found on St Martin's Lane, Westminster. Opening in the Edwardian era on the 24th of December 1904, this is one of London's largest and most lavish family theatres known for variety shows, and became known as the People's Palace of Entertainment, a true vaudeville music hall beauty. Built by theatre impresario Sir Oswald Stoll and designed by architect Frank Matcham, this theatre is so large that from its beginning it had lifts installed. Despite the aim of creating a place that was affordable and spectacular for as many customers as possible, the theatre closed down after only 2 years, and sadly remained empty until 1907, when it finally began to find its feet and become established as a successful theatre. In the 1960s it added a cinema area, and the Sadler's Wells Opera Company also moved in. The company later changed its name to the English National Opera, and the theatre also became home of the English National Ballet. And the ghost of this palace of entertainment? Well, during World War I, as it was coming to a close, after tortuous years of fighting, a group of friends were attending a performance at the theatre. They realised a friend of them all was walking down the aisle of the auditorium, and before their eyes their figure disappeared. It was later that they found out that he had been killed in action in the trenches. On the same day and at the same time they had all seen his ghost at the theatre, a classic crisis apparition. The poor young man, a cavalry officer, had attended a performance at the theatre on his last day of leave, and apparently he had become besotted by one of the ballerinas of Diaghilev's Ballet Russe, Lydia Lopakova, and spent every evening of his leave watching her on stage. I think this event must have made him so happy that his mind wandered to that and her as he passed. The ghost of this young man was sighted for at least 10 years after the record of his passing away. So, there we have the long-awaited part 2 of Theatre Ghosts. I do love a good ghost story, and theatres are buildings so full of drama and excitement and romance and superstition, heartbreak and nerves, jubilation, disappointments. So much human energy bound in one small space. No wonder those who loved these theatres still return, and no wonder they are able to with all the energy that's held within the walls. My eldest niece is a stage actress, singer and dancer in London, and I can attest to all of these emotions running through her during auditions and then the performances. So Jasmine, this episode is dedicated to you, Petal. I hope you enjoyed this second foray into the ghost stories of London. I really loved researching this episode and putting it all together. The link to my favourite haunted theatre book is in the description. So until next time, dear friends, take care, brightest of blessings, and remember, don't play with the fairy folk or the ghosts, or you may end up in one of my folk tales yourself.